if an alliance between these two is made, the rand will fall. But if an alliance with the DA is made, the rand will not fall. How is the rand now being channeled in such a way that it is because of alliance? Isn't it because of our mineral resources that we have in our trading system that we do with other nations that the rand will fall?
Yeah,
you understand what I mean?
Gotling, I'm not sure. Did you see that? I would say it's a rebuke by the African Union, the African peer review mechanism issued at Fitch. Which is, of course, the ratings agency. And they've told them not to interfere in South Africa's internal politics, and that they regard that statement that was made last week around, which coalition they think would be better as interfering and meddling in South Africa's political internal affairs.
And they've been doing this for many years now. That's why I'm telling you that foreign relations, foreign politics determines our local politics. That's why the Europeans, their economic interest is opposed to any kind that we should nationalize our banks. We should have our own state-owned banks. We should nationalize our mines. The Reserve Bank should be state-owned. They are opposed to that.
Okay.
Because it will weaken the alliance that they have with the African landowners and European investors and mine owners and industrialists.
All right, Gotling, let's leave it there. That's Gotling's view out in Mbombela. We apologize for the poor connectivity there. Not a great line out to Gotling. All right, let's wrap it up with Sekhatli in Mangweng. Sekhatli, good morning.
Morning, Cathy, and how are you?
Sekhatli, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start asking the listeners not to ask me how I am. Because this morning, everybody has started off the conversation with how are you? I think I've said I'm well probably 12 times already. So no more asking me how I am. I am fine.
Okay, so it's fine. It's just about greeting anyway. Right. But anyway, today I'm so happy. It's my birthday. It's the birthday of my daughter, the last born, and then the name is Cathy anyway. She's named after my mother.
Happy birthday to your daughter, Sekhatli.
Thank you very much. Cathy, now I'm just off the road a bit from the political part. I'm hurt, man. Last week I just went to some of the relatives, and then I used to hear this teenage pregnancy thing, this 9-year, 10-year-old got pregnant and all those stuff. So until when I visited one of my cousin's daughter who was pregnant, like the way they used to say on radio and all those news. And let me just tell you something, I'm actually appealing to some other officials, nurses and doctors or whatever, whoever is working in the hospital. It's time that we really need. We don't ask those young ladies. We just have to call the police, and then the social workers must open a case, and then they go and arrest that culprit, because this is getting out of hand, and it's too much.
Sekhatli, this is what the Department of Social Development and Education have been pushing for, that these matters are just reported to the police. But it's sometimes the families that don't want the intervention or the involvement of the police.
But in that case, Cathy, I think if it doesn't need to be legislated or what. Again, we're afraid of having this statutory rape as a criminal offense. If they just call the social workers and say, we've got another scene here, and then social workers comes, we don't need the permission of that parent. We just go and open a case. It's a statutory rape. It's a state against that culprit, and then we just arrest that person, whether they like it or not, because the child was molested, was abused sexually. And then so it doesn't need any permission of anybody. It just needs the police to do the job, social workers to do the job. And I'm asking myself all the time, when the child was going through, I'm not sure whether it's taking vital scale or what. So what were they saying when they see the ID number is like the child who's just about to go and give a birth?
Yeah.
So then that's me. I think we really need to get to that thing and make sure that it doesn't happen anymore. Unfortunately, speaking, it was happening on the radio. I heard it on the radio. Now it happened in my family. My heart is broken.
Oh,
What
Sekhatli.
about it is my child? Technically, that one is my child as well.
All right. Sekhatli, out in Mankweng, such an important point that you're raising there. And if more of us, Sekhatli, think about this matter in the way that you've articulated it, then we'll be closer towards resolving this problem of pregnancies, but also, on the other end, the reality of statutory rape that is taking place in our country. It's time for the latest news update.
In our top stories, political analyst speaks on MK party members taking their seats in parliament, and government on track to deliver printing machine for driver's license. Good morning. Professor of Politics Junisa Derkutsa says members of Umkhonto weSizwe party still have an opportunity to be sworn in after the first sittings of the National Assembly and the NCOP. MK party members has boycotted the first sittings expected to take place on Friday and Saturday, presided over by the Chief Justice. The National Assembly sitting is scheduled to take place on Friday morning, while the NCOP is expected to take place on Saturday. The party is challenging the 2024 election results outcome. The MK party is currently the third largest political party, which garnered 58 seats in the assembly. Kutsa says nothing disqualifies the MK members from taking their seats later.
It doesn't mean that they are completely excluded from Parliament or disqualified from Parliament. What they will not be able to do is that they will not be sworn in as members of Parliament with all the others. They will not be able to participate in the election of the President and of the Speaker and also of the Deputy Speaker. But when they decide that they want to come back to Parliament, join Parliament, they can do so. They have been elected to it. Nothing disqualifies them for that. Then a judge will have to swear them in as members of Parliament, and once they've done that, then they will become part of the community of parliamentarians in the National Assembly.
The Chief Executive Officer of Magalies Water, Sandile Mkhize, has resigned. Mkhize, who had worked for the Water Board based in Rustenburg in the northwest for almost a decade, will leave his position at the end of the month. He's amongst those who oversaw the upgrading of a number of water treatment works. Manager of Communications at Magalies Water, David Magai, says he was also tasked with integrating Magalies Water with Sidibeng Water.
Magalies Water Chairperson Dr. Lydia Sebego has thanked Mr. Mkhize for his loyalty and commitment, spending over 9 years wherein he led the organization to 3 consecutive clean audits, as well as delivering on a number of capital infrastructure projects within the Bojanala Platinum District as well as the Northwest Province. Magalies Water will in due course announce the appointment of the acting Chief Executive Officer and thereafter pursue the recruitment processes.
There's still no clarity as to why a group of men entered a barber shop at Sightseeing Kailicha over the weekend. The suspects entered the barber shop and started shooting. The incident claimed 4 lives, including children. The Western Cape Minister of Community Safety, Regan Allen, says police are investigating the incident.
There is persons of interest that is being tracked, but we have seen once again how brazen criminals have become by literally walking into a particular shop, and like you have indicated, 3 children have been killed, including 3 additional children that have also been wounded. But I am keeping close contact with the South African Police Service to ultimately receive any update that I will be able to communicate as soon as possible.
A 39-year-old police officer, Cedric Koza, who fatally shot his wife, her sister and brother, is expected to appear in the Mpumalanga High Court in Mbombela this morning. Koza has pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder. He committed the murders last year, April, in Masoi. Koza killed his wife, Nomthandazo Mnisi, and his siblings, who were trying to mediate on the couple's domestic issues. Koza used his service firearm to shoot the victims. The Department of Transport says it's on track to deliver new driver's license card and printing equipment for the country, despite challenges in finding a suitable service provider to print the license cards. Department of Transport spokesperson Colin Msibi has called upon the public to be patient.
We can now confirm that this time around we've been able to receive 5 bids from various bidders. With the evaluation and adjudication of those bids completed, the department is almost at the brink of pronouncing a new dawn in the driving license environment or driving license card environment. The only last hurdle that remains is the audit process, which is also being finalized. Once that is done, we believe we're home and dry.
And finally, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations says the Security Council has voted for peace by backing a ceasefire plan for Gaza. Linda Thomas-Greenfield says the international community was united behind the proposed deal. The BBC's Yolanda Nell reports.
Israel, even in its response at the UN, its representative made clear that the country's military objective remains to dismantle Hamas's military capabilities in Gaza, as well as to bring the hostages home. And then you have Hamas. It's welcomed this vote, but at the same time, it's not given an official endorsement of it either. And, you know, Hamas has very much stuck to its position that it wants to have guarantees that there will be, as a result of any deal it signs up to.
Recapping the top story, Professor of Politics at UNISA Derkutsa says members of Umkhonto weSizwe Party still have an opportunity to be sworn in after the first sittings of the National Assembly and the NCOP. For SAFM News, I'm Anne Musa.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide, leading the conversation. Are you blowing your paycheck on car insurance every month? Monica, 39 from Three Rivers, pays just 1,515 Rand a month for her 2018 BMW 320i.
None of the insurance companies has come near to the price I'm paying. I am happy at insurance. I'm going nowhere.
SMS out to 30754 now for a quick quote that could save you hundreds every month. You'll also find out about included benefits like panic assistance and help it out 24-hour roadside assistance. Yusuf, 45 from Tegadal, pays just 700 Rand a month for his 2021 VW Polo.
Help it out, took the family up to go and see the snow and I got stuck. The service was quick even though it was in a very remote area. Absolutely phenomenal service from our insurance.
SMS out to 30754 now. That's out to 30754. Outsurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's, C's and limits apply. Premiums are risk profile dependent and reviewed annually. Client comments do not constitute financial advice.
The Trilidor Ultimate Big Blue Sale is now on. Get amazing discounts on the best security South Africans trust. With over 50 franchises across the country, you can always find a security expert near you. So call 0861 Trilidor or visit trilidor.co.za today. Terms and conditions apply.
Municipal services play a vital role in keeping our city safe, clean, and functional. By paying for municipal services like your water bill, you're investing in the future of the City of Johannesburg's water supply. Paying for your services is not just a transaction, but a commitment to the sustainability of your community. Let's continue to pave the way for a brighter tomorrow, one payment at a time. Brought to you by Johannesburg Water, a water utility that cares.
Are you ready to empower yourself with an accredited tertiary qualification? Stadio Higher Education's distance learning programs will set you up for success. Whether you're balancing work and family or you're a school leaver who must work to support yourself and your studies, Stadio offers access to high-quality, affordable qualifications in law, teacher education, commerce, admin and management, policing, and more. Mid-year applications are now open. Visit stadio.ac.za and register today. Stadio, a new vision in higher education.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
It's 10 after 10 o'clock. Welcome to the second hour of The Talking Point. Coming up in this hour, we're talking finance with Brian Hirsch, and we'll be getting into the nitty-gritties of estate, retirement, taxation, and investment planning. All of that of course, really being the outline of the principles that constitute a good financial plan. So over the next 4 weeks, we'll be dealing with each of those topics separately. We'll get to Brian in a moment. Before we do, lots of your WhatsApp voice notes sent through from the open line. We'll take a couple of them and then get straight into finance with Brian.
Let's have the conversation. WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107.
Good morning, Sis Cathy. This is Mbongo Sonisa Palindulo. Sis Cathy, I think the municipal manager there at Matlosana was arrested after the expose in your show, and the lady that they were alleging that she was corrupt, and then I don't know if she was bribing authorities. And then can you make follow up with that? What is it? That thing in KZN of those boreholes that were being dug up for 500,000. Can you make follow up now? It's after elections. Thanks.
Good morning, Cathy. This is Zanele in Durban. Oh, it is so cold in Durban. Cathy, I'm not a fan of Uxolile George, but this time around, the decision he took, the step he took to write a letter to Ujabulani Khumalo informing him that he won't be a member of the parliament, I'm impressed, because Jabulani Khumalo was going to attend the parliament as the only member of the MK. It's not just that I don't want him to be a member of MK because it has nothing to do with MK in any way, but I fear for his life because he is pursuing something against the whole party. No one need him there. So Xolile George came to my rescue.
Cathy, good morning. I am Takatayo in Cape Town. I am so disappointed by the voters' turnout, especially coming to the ANC side, because Dadu Ramaphosa, he was the one who was applauded about the 350 that he gave the people who are unemployed, COVID-19 of 2020, but coming to the voters, they didn't vote him to get that 50+1. So sometimes there's a lot need to be done by the ANC to make the country go forward, especially crime and unemployment. I think they need to go and do some thorough work on that one. Thanks.
SAFM values your views. Be an active citizen. Talking Finance with Brian Hirsch, making sense of your finance.
14 after 10 o'clock. Let's get straight into our segment. Good morning, Brian Hirsch.
Good morning, Cathy.
Why do you sound so somber? You were excited just 2 seconds ago, and now you're suddenly changing your tone.
Because I can't talk to you anymore. I was excited to see you, and now I'm sitting here in front of a mic. It's very different, looking at you or looking at a mic.
Okay. Acting like you've got some semblance of decorum in you. So, Brian, today we're talking about financial planning and the 4 principles of financial planning. And it's going to be quite an in-depth series that we're starting, right?
Yeah,
over the next 4 weeks.
In-depth, but I'm going to try and keep it down that people can understand. I mean, the importance of this program is for people to hear and try to understand what I have to say. And most people, when they meet me, they say the one thing they like about this program is that I bring it to a level where the average person who's not financially astute, and let me tell you, I'm not computer astute and things like that. And when people talk to me about computers, I haven't got a clue what they're talking. Someone will spend 20 minutes talking to me, and someone will say, "Did you learn a lot?" And I said, "No, they lost me after 1 minute." So my program's not to lose anyone. But there are different segments in this financial plan. There is estate planning, which deals very much with starting with, do you need life insurance? Do you need disability insurance? What about your will? And what about trusts? There's retirement planning. How do you plan for retirement? At what stage? And all the different components. There's taxation, that there are methods of saving tax and reducing taxation. And then part of whatever you've got left is part of what investment planning. It's very much what I used to call it a jigsaw puzzle, but I like to use the analogy of a bingo card. Mm-hmm. As you know, the center of the bingo card is your free center, and that is the will. That's the cornerstone. And then each component at the corner is estate tax, investment and retirement planning. And then you fill the gaps and how that all fills in. I'm not going to fill all the gaps because a lot of those gaps are complicated, but everything I'm going to be dealing with in the last 4 weeks, I've dealt with regularly on this program at different stages, but I just want to bring it all together under this one puzzle.
Let's kick it off then with estate planning.
Okay. Well,
what is estate planning? What is the point? What is an estate actually?
Well,
what
is
an estate?
Is what you own. In all forms, whether it be a motor car, whether it be a house, whether you have retirement funds, whether you have insurance policies, everything that you own that in the event of your death will need to be collated under your will in terms of either beneficiary nominations on policies or wishes under a pension fund, or all those assets. And everyone's estate is different. You may have a small estate, you may have a large estate. So estate planning deals, I've got assets. If I'm alive, what happens if I die? What happens to my family in the event of premature death? What happens ultimately with winding up my estate? Do I have a will? If I have young children, how are my young children going to inherit, even if they're over the age of 18? Do you want, because children over the age of 18 can inherit, but do you want your child to inherit your estate at age 18? They've just finished school, they're about to go and study, and now you want them to inherit a whole lot of money? Or do you want to make sure that your estate is maintained and monies are paid out on a monthly or yearly basis to fund whatever your children need, and then at a later stage when they're a bit more mature, anything between 25 and 30, they can receive the capital. And that's estate planning. That's because there's a lot of components and a lot of documentation that go in estate planning. For example, beneficiary nominations under your life policies. Regularly check that. 2, membership statements under your pension fund. Your pension fund is dealt very differently if in the event of your death to your life policies. Life policy you can appoint who you like. Under retirement fund you can only ask the trustees to pay out the following people, but the trustees have a responsibility to see if there are any other dependents. And in South Africa, there are many double families where you have children. So that's estate planning.
Brian, I'm going to ask you just to go back and repeat what you said, starting off with the beneficiary nominations, because that distinction is important. We get a lot of calls about it, especially when it comes to pension funds and life insurance and how those nominations work.
Okay, well, there's a very big difference between a pension fund, whether it be a company retirement fund or your own retirement annuity, as compared to life insurance. You can appoint anyone under a life policy who you want. You can appoint a mistress, you can appoint whatever you like if you need to. And I've had a situation where people have come to see me and there's suddenly this policy left to a woman we never even knew existed. Terrible setting for the family when they suddenly find that the husband's taken out a policy for some girlfriend, and remember that's now fully disclosed in the estate. So very simply you can appoint who you like. But when it comes to children, you don't want children. Who's laughing? Why are you laughing, Cathy? And it's good to see you laugh. It's so healthy, you know how healthy it is.
Because out of all the things that that I expected you to say, Brian, I didn't expect you to talk about the ways in which people are still finding way to legitimize, the presence of their mistresses within their estate planning, even though they might not acknowledge it when they're alive.
Mistresses and children. Don't laugh.
Oh, mistresses and children.
And children born of that particular individual.
Oh, so children that maybe the wife might not be aware of, or the person that they're with might not be aware of.
So that's the life insurance. That's the appointment. You can, and I wanted to make the point, you can appoint anyone. And remember, the beneficiary that you appoint on your policies overrides anything you may say in your will. So if I leave you a policy, Cathy, if I leave to my wife, but in my will I put it, no, it's going to my son, the insurance company will ignore that and they will pay it to my wife. And if you're divorced and you haven't made a change to that beneficiary nomination, then 10 years down the line you remarry to someone else. That money, if you haven't changed the beneficiary within 90 days, will go to your ex-wife or your ex-husband, whatever the case may be. When it comes to a retirement policy, even though employees appoint who they think are the beneficiary, they are the nominated beneficiaries, but it is up to the company and the trustees of the fund to ensure that it goes to dependents. So let's take that example, the extreme example where I appointed an ex-wife, but she's no longer a dependent, and I didn't appoint my new wife. Automatically the trustees will not pay it to the ex-wife. They will pay it to the new wife. They will pay it to dependents. And so often, again, you may be surprised, dependents come from all over the place on the death of an individual. I'm a dependent, this man or this woman's been paying a certain amount. Yeah. So there's a big difference between your beneficiary nomination and your nomination under a pension fund.
So how does one what's the criteria used to determine who is a dependent and who is not? So if you have a scenario where, let's say somebody has an ex-wife, but they were never divorced, they just are separated, they now have another partner who is dependent on them, so who they're taking care of on a month-to-month basis. At the time of this individual's death, who then is the pension fund going to consider as a rightful dependent in that instance?
The wife, the new wife, who is dependent on the individual, and as long as the ex-wife or ex-husband, I keep make both, as long as they weren't dependent. But there could be a child that's been supported that would be considered dependent. There could be 3 children, 2 are now working and out of the home, 1 is at home. So the trustees will then have to say what percentage is going to go to the wife and what percentage is going to be set aside for that other dependent. All dependents have to be catered for. Any non-dependent will come after they've done all their evaluation. They've got 12 months to evaluate under a retirement fund who the benefits should be paid to. But it'll always be paid to dependents and nothing to do with the will. Whereas in a life policy, whoever you have nominated, the insurance company will pay to that individual. Well, I should never say whoever, in 99.99% cases.
What do people have to do to show that they were dependents of this individual, male or female?
Financial support. Financial support. How were they supported? Were they given money every month? Was the education paid for? What actually was happening? That's all you have to show. And then they will qualify and calculate each percentage that goes. And I've had a lot of situations where policies were not changed and benefits paid to the wrong party, and under retirement funds, a wife thinking that where a husband and wife both work and the wife is not dependent on the husband and that there are other parties who are dependent, it could go down to nephews and nieces, it could go to grandchildren, anywhere. That's the responsibility of trustees. And what will happen if one beneficiary or dependent is left out, they will stop the company paying out those benefits until the company is satisfied that all dependents have been catered for.
But Brian, what we have often is, in the case of death of an individual, often the families are the ones that will sort of close ranks. So even with the example that you have given, if somebody now has a new partner, it is families that will ensure that partner actually gets nothing.
The company, the pension fund itself, under Section 37C, can only pay out to dependents. And because they've got to be very careful that another dependent doesn't suddenly appear, dependents have 12 months. And everyone, if you're dependent on someone and they die, Cathy, it's not difficult to come forward and explain why, prove you are dependent, prove money's been paid across to you, prove for education, whatever the case may be. It's not a difficult thing. It does become awkward and difficult. I mean, in this particular case where I told you we had a situation where this policy suddenly appeared in the name of someone else. And by the way, this wasn't a young man. This was a man in his 80s who must have had a relationship with someone 30 years ago and never changed the beneficiary. But very sad and very upsetting for the family.
Okay, so we have dealt then just with understanding what estate planning is and just some of the components then that go into estate planning.
No, Cathy, we haven't, because we just dealt with life insurance and retirement funds. We've now got to deal with in the estate, the will.
Yes,
because that's part of estate planning.
Yes. I was actually just coming.
Sorry.
I was actually just coming to that,
My
Brian. That the will really is at the centre of estate
it's
planning.
What I call it's the cornerstone of your plan. And I must tell you, Cathy, we're not alone in South Africa. 80% of people throughout the world do not have a will. And let me tell you, as I was on TV and my guest yesterday, Daryl Bennett said, you do have a will. Because if you don't have a will, the estate, the government is your will. The government is the one that's going to handle your estate. Whereas if you have a will, you'll have an executor. So he says everyone has a will, even if you die intestate, you still have a will. But the last thing you want to do is leave it up to the government and the powers that may be to determine, one, how your assets must be divided, and two, how your assets must be invested in the Guardian Fund. The Guardian Fund is quite a conservative fund, and if you've got assets for your family that they've got to live and they need growth, you may not be able to get them. So that cornerstone is the will, which again, so many people, we're not alone in South Africa, so many people don't believe they need a will. They do. Everyone needs a will just to deal. How do you want to be buried? Some people want to be cremated. Some people want to be buried. Some people may have requests to go back to Zimbabwe, be buried in South Africa, Malawi, whatever. So even if you have very few assets or no assets, you should just have a will that says, this is what I want ultimately to happen with my remains. Where would I be buried? So that's a simple clause, and that's something that one overlooks as well. It's not just the money, it's what happens to the body.
Why should we not want the government to handle our affairs? So what's the worst case scenario when you don't have a will and it ends up then in the hands of the government?
Time.
Your assets end up in the hands of government.
Time. Takes time to wind up a state. Can take time when you've got professionals and that your state is very simple. It can be done in a short period of time. You can have communication with someone about what's happening. If you want to deal with different departments and different master's office throughout the country, I mean, if you look at the moment, 3 master's offices have been suspended: Johannesburg, Bloemfontein and Pretoria. So to get information from them, I mean, go into the master's office and all you'll see is files everywhere, which is your file. People just come in and pull files. I mean, that's the first thing. Now they're going to wind up the estate. They want a whole lot of information. They're going to write letters. They're not going to push because they've got so many estates to deal with. So they'll drop a note. People don't reply. So that's another 6 months. Then ultimately, when the will does get wound up, those funds have to be invested, and they're going to be invested in the Guardian's Fund, and the Guardian Fund is managed by government. And then if you suddenly need money from that Guardian Fund, you've got to get that money. I mean, Cathy, yes, have a ball, have a wonderful time. I'm telling you right now, 10 years down the line, you'll still be complaining.
Do we know how much money is likely sitting in that Guardian Fund, Brian?
No, not a clue. They're interested. I'll try and find out.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting just to know. We're talking finance with Brian Hirsch. It's 10:30. Time for the latest news headlines. We'll continue our conversation. Today, we're focusing on estate planning and, of course, part 1 of what will be a 4-week series. This is really around financial planning and the 4 core principles that go into a solid financial plan. It's time for your latest news headlines.
A very good morning with the news headlines. Ke Modupi Makgalemele. A number of NGOs mobilizing aid for the victims of last week's tornado that left a trail of destruction in Otongati and the surrounding areas north of Durban are now focusing on helping people who suffered damage to their homes but do not have insurance. Analysts say members of the MK party still have an opportunity to be sworn in after the first sittings of the National Assembly and the NCOP. And a court in the US has ordered one of the world's biggest banana producers to pay nearly $40 million in damages to the families of 8 men killed by a Colombian paramilitary group. I'll be back with a full news update at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 18 rand 65 to the dollar, 23 rand 74 to the pound, and 20 rand 09 to the euro. Markets in Asia were mainly weaker at the closing bell. The JSE mainly higher in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are higher this hour. Gold is trading at $2,304. Platinum $963 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $79.78 a barrel.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays 9 a.m. till midday. Talking Finance with Brian Hirsch, making sense of your finance.
All right, we continue the conversation with Brian Hirsch. Yes, Brian?
Interesting. It's absolutely amazing that the rand is trading at 1865. Mm-hmm. Because the rand is not governed by what happens in South Africa. The rand is governed by foreign buyers of our government bonds and investments. And the rand is indicating a very, very, very positive outcome from the coalition talks. And, although they don't know much more than what we know, foreigners are expecting something more positive. And if it is positive, we could see the rand break 18, good for petrol prices, good for inflation, good for interest rates, maybe lower interest rates later this year. All positive things which people don't really understand on a daily, day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. They understand when prices come down, when petrol prices come down. They understand when interest rates fall. They may not understand what makes all these things happen, but I can tell you, rand is a big component.
So the jitters have been held off for now.
Yeah, because on the Friday night, when the numbers were being counted, the rand was trading at 1879.
Yeah.
It then opened on Monday at round about 1865, and most commentators were absolutely amazed that there wasn't a negative approach because we didn't have a solution. And then it went back to about 1895, 2 days ago, and now it's back at 1865. So that rand does tell you something. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really mean too much in terms other than importers and exporters who are buying and selling rands and buying and selling dollars. Very important, but certainly indicating a good result.
Well, we're going to have to wait and see what happens post-Friday. So next week, Tuesday, because Monday's a public holiday, next week, Tuesday, when the markets open, I think is going to be quite telling because then we'll have a president, we'll have a speaker, we'll have a better picture of what the 7th administration is going to look like. So, Brian, we were still talking about estate planning and you were running through the risks of what happens if you don't have a will and the difficulties then that you're likely to face within government and the Guardian Fund that often would be managing then somebody's affairs if they don't have a will. One of the other things that is popular, Brian, and we see this amongst politicians, right, where they open these trusts and everybody seems to have a trust these days and putting money in a trust and hiding quote-unquote assets in a trust. How does it all work? What is the purpose of a trust?
Okay, the purpose of a trust is threefold. The first purpose of a trust is to protect your assets and protect your family from misusing those assets. You again, husband or wife, and I talk about it because many years ago when I first started in the industry, I've said this before on radio, my father wanted my sister to marry a doctor, an accountant or a lawyer. Today, everyone wants their daughters to be doctors, accountants and lawyers. And many families now, the main breadwinner is the woman. So I need to talk generically when I talk about that. But the purpose of a trust really is to protect assets. I mean, I think of a lady now who lost her husband. She doesn't know too much about finance. She's come into a lot of money. She's never looked after money before. She could end up marrying someone else and he could then get hold of her money. So often a husband protects assets in a trust from individuals misusing those funds. The second reason is, and the most important reason, is for children. Your children can't inherit. So what you do is you have what's called a testamentary trust, which is different to what's called your normal trust, which is a trust you form in your lifetime. That very simply is where you put assets into the trust and you appoint the trustees, the people who are going to look after the money. The third reason is it protects you against insolvency. If assets are put into a trust legitimately and years down the line your business goes insolvent and your assets are held by a trust, they are protected from creditors. And that's a very big reason why people form trusts. However, the formation of trusts in South Africa is ludicrous. Everyone always phones me, must have a trust. You don't need a trust. You don't need a trust. You can keep your assets in. If you're not in business and there are not risks of something failing in your business and putting all your assets at risk, you certainly don't need a trust. You can avoid future death duties because if you've got assets of, say, 10 million and you put those into a trust and the assets grow in your own name, from 10 to 20 million over the next 20 years, that 20 million is dutiable. And duty at 20 million is 20%, subject to deductions. But if it's in a trust and it grows to 20 million, and you only inject 10 million, your death duties are only calculated on 10, not 20. So there are estate duty advantages, but there are other disadvantages. So all I'm saying, anyone who forms a trust needs to think very carefully. I understand, the other type of trust which I'm talking about is the testamentary trust, which is a trust that you put in clauses in your will, that if you die, how do you want those assets protected, and particularly for younger children and children under the age of 18, as I've said and I repeat, and then other kids maybe between 18 and 25, 18 and 30, that you don't want them to get their hands on the capital, although you give the trustees permission to release capital when needed. But the trustees then can say to you, why do you need this money? If someone says, I need this money for a car, it's a small car, trustees certainly, in today's times, a car is an essential item if you can have it. Or education, or if you're getting married and there's certain things. So trustees will always work with the beneficiaries to see that things are done. But when you said to me, so now there are a whole lot of things happening in my life, and I'm now dealing with trustees I don't even know my family, know nothing. It's going to take time, and that's why a will is so important.
Why do you say that the formation of trusts in South Africa has become ridiculous? What's happening in that space?
Well, it's costly, number one, to have a trust. Number two, assets in a trust, you lose control of those assets. In other words, if you put assets into a trust, you cannot have control of those assets. Those assets are now controlled by trustees. You give over the control of those assets. So you're no longer in control of your own assets, and trustees can turn around and say, you want to do something, we don't agree that you should be doing it. And they can actually stop you doing it. Whereas previously in South Africa, trustees just rubber stamped everything.
I was going to say, but don't people nominate trustees who are like their BFFs and who just agree to everything they want anyway? So yes, you have these trustees, but they're just there in form. There's no impact that they have on the running of the trust.
Trustees have an obligation to beneficiaries. They have a legal obligation. And if trustees act inappropriately, they can be held liable not by the settler, is the person who created the trust, but children and grandchildren down the line. Why did you take this action? And trustees can be held legally liable. So professional trustees, the big firms, have professional indemnity insurance, and they've got cover from insurance, but individuals don't. So just to become a trustee, because your friends asked you to, you need to apply your mind. You need to look at what's happened in South Africa since grey listing, because you made the point, people just putting money in trusts. People played with trusts in South Africa up to a year ago. Now the regulations and rules are so much more onerous, as they are elsewhere in the world, and as where people all over the world behave correctly with to their trustees. Whereas in South Africa we've played games. Yes, as you say, just get my brother and my sister, you become a trustee, I'll make every decision, you'll just sign it off.
Yes.
That signing off now puts an illegal responsibility on that trustee, and that trustee can be held legally responsible to beneficiaries. And we're not talking about just the individual, we're talking about down the line, children. And if children are fighting and you did something for one child and not another, you could be held responsible.
Okay, so Brian, it sounds to me that we may need to have a whole other conversation around trust, because I certainly wasn't aware of some of the things that you're saying. It's in the stricter requirements after South Africa's grey listing and the consequences that has had on trusts. So overall, is it a good idea as far as you're concerned for people to have a trust?
Everyone's circumstances are different, and one needs to look at it. But 90% of the people who are forming trust should not be forming trusts. I'd just like to just share with you one case I've got at the moment. A woman lost her son. He wasn't married. He didn't have a will. She's discovered now that he has 2 bank accounts. Her son was in the 40s. He has 2 bank accounts with 2 different banks. She's gone to the banks to see what's in the bank account. If anything, the bank will give her no details because she has not got a letter of authority. She's not got a letter of authority because there was nothing in the state. She's now found out when she's gone through documentation that he had 2 bank accounts. The banks will not give her the details. She went to an attorney. The attorney has quoted her to get the letter of authority 8,500 rand. She doesn't even know if there's 8,500 rand in the bank account. She's now got to somehow get to the master's office. There's a form, I think it's an 8 bracket 3, where she can get a letter of authority just to go and find out. There's no will, so she's going to have to prove, obviously, she's the mother and that there were no dependents. And she's got to go through all this, and there may be nothing in the bank accounts. So that's the difficulty when you don't have a will.
All right. Okay, I see some of you have already started calling in. We also have some voice notes asking Brian for some advice. Look, what we'll do is that we'll pace the next couple of weeks. We might take longer than 4 weeks dealing with either of these topics, but the point really is that we all walk the journey together, and that is would be the big emphasis, at least from my side. So I'll start taking your calls then for Brian on everything that we have touched on so far. The number to dial 086 000 2032. That's for our studio line. The WhatsApp voice note line 0614 104 107. All right, let me kick it off then with some of the voice notes that you've started sending through. Brian, all of these voice notes are specifically asking you for advice. We'll take one at a time, and then I'll go over to our callers this hour. I see we've got quite a number of women that are lining up, which is great. Love the fact that you're also a part of the conversation.
Hi, Brian. I've got a will, and I'm just wondering how realistic the executors will be at Sanlam. Because what if my mother is broke during the month? What if because I didn't state that they must adjust the monthly by inflation and all of that, does she have control to say, hey, this is ultimately my money, I need 5,000 rand extra this month?
No, you're talking about the winding up of a will. You're talking about an executor. An executor can do absolutely nothing other than what is stated in the will. He cannot deviate in any way. To give you an example, we had a client, an elderly lady of 101 who died last year. She left in her will to her 2 children, but she also left a note that she wanted each of the carers, she had 3 carers, to get 10,000 rand. We were not, as executor, able, because it was not in the will, so we could not do it. The family had to do it separately. Okay, in this particular case, they inherited the money, so it didn't make a difference. So the executor can only do what they are obliged to. However, if you have a trust, so in the will, you said, I'm going to leave my money to my mother monthly and she's going to get an income, and then you've got other provisions for the trustees to deviate. Trustees can deviate. The powers of trustees are enormous compared to the powers of an executor. So don't confuse the executor, who's the person who winds up the estate, with anyone who's a trustee who looks after the monies.
Okay. Thank you for that clarity, Brian. Another question for you.
Hello, Brian. Hello, Cathy. This is Anonymous from Pretoria. I was married for over 10 years in community of property. My wife recently passed and we have 2 minor children. She, on her government employee pension fund, made me the only beneficiary, with the understanding that I will be able to take care of the kids. The kids qualify for a pension. We've applied for that. But will the trustees give me all the money, or will they keep it in the guardian's fund, or put a portion in the guardian's fund for the kids? Thank you.
Okay, so let me make the point is, often the surviving, you said she was your ex-wife, so then I'm not quite sure what your divorce agreement says and how you settled being married in community of property, because remember, in community of property means at both of death and at the time of the divorce, assets are split 50-50. That's what community of property means. But now that she's left the assets to the 2 children, and they are dependent, the trustees would work with you to see how these funds are going to be maintained. Are they going to be held in the Guardian's Fund? Are they going to be held in a beneficiary fund with Sanlam, which would probably be the answer, because I'm sure that within the clauses, there's a clause that says Sanlam will look after the funds, so it's unlikely to go to the government fund. And then how are you going to deal with this? Is a discussion you're going to need to have with the trustees.
So Brian, if I heard him correctly, he said that he was listed as the only beneficiary. So the fact that they now have these 2 dependents, does that change anything?
No.
What does that change?
He's not a beneficiary. They are the dependents. They will receive the money. But if they're too young to receive it, the trustees will work with them to make sure, because they're not going to want to look after the children every month. He's going to look after his children every month, and therefore the trustees will. That's why I said he'll need a discussion with the trustees, and he'll need to satisfy trustees what he's going to do. The proceeds are not for his benefit. However, if the children live in the house, there will be an allocation of costs that the children, what the children are paying to, or what the children are costing within the house. If there's a staff member, and maybe the staff member is looking after the kids, all those costs will be taken care of. What won't be taken care of his personal and his share of those costs.
Would things have been different if they didn't have dependents? So would he have been a beneficiary if they didn't have dependents, because he's the nominee there?
No, because the companies have to, in terms of section, and I repeat, 37C, they have to pay out dependents, not beneficiaries. He's a beneficiary. If it had been a life policy, no problem. As maybe the guardian of the 2 kids. No, it will be paid out to the 2 kids. How it gets paid out depends on their ages and in discussion with Sanlam.
All right. Vivian, Sharon, I'll be taking your calls shortly. Let me take a quick break.
Mama Kitty, I heard Rand Water talking on the radio about how dangerous it is for people to encroach on their pipeline servitude.
Yes, those high-pressure Rand Water pipelines are under the ground distributing megalitres of water. When people build on top of the pipeline, Rand Water is unable to conduct maintenance on the pipeline, which has a negative impact on water provision. Pipelines can burst without warning. People could get seriously injured or worse.
Yes, people can die from a bursting pipe. That is why people need to understand that Rand Water servitude is where a Rand Water pipeline is located. If we build our houses or businesses on a Rand Water servitude, then we are encroaching on that servitude. They say if communities want to know whether they have encroached over servitudes, they should look for the Rand Water beacons.
The beacons indicate the presence of Rand Water pipelines under the ground. They're rectangular, made of concrete, are painted either white or blue, and have the Rand Water logo on them.
Let's take a walk around our area to see if there are any Rand Water beacons so that we can also tell the neighbors.
Rand Water, celebrating 120 years of existence and still finding new ways to provide clean, portable bulk water.
The Trillidor Ultimate Big Blue Sale is now on. Get amazing discounts on the best security South Africans trust. With over 50 franchises across the country, you can always find a security expert near you. So call 0861 Trillidor or visit trillidor.co.za today. Terms and conditions apply.
When my son was accepted for national championships, I wasn't prepared for the costs. Then I remembered that Cash Converters has a 30-day cash advance loan. Just go to your nearest Cash Converters store with your jewelry, electronics, tech, or something valuable. They'll keep it safe for you and you'll walk out with the cash you need. This loan made it possible for my son's dreams to come true. Now I'm a proud mom of a champion. Cash Converters. We buy, we sell, we loan cash.
SAFM Sunrise with Stephen Grootes.
William on the line from Cape Town about the situation in Khayelitsha. William, hi.
Hello, Stephen. I've heard now the guys say there's no vehicles in Khayelitsha. He's lying.
Why do you say
That's
that?
not true. I'm staying in Cape Town, and the thing is that there's no visible policing. They're not doing their job. That's the problem. If you come over by Philippi, you see there is no traffic cops. I mean, they can deploy the people in the townships. People just do whatever they want, and you just see it's only in the township. There's no law and order.
All right, William in Cape Town. No, I can hear your frustration. Thank you.
SAFM Sunrise with Stephen Grootes, 6 to 9 a.m. Cathy Mohlahlana on SAFM. Talking Finance with Brian Hirsch, making sense of your finance.
We continue the conversation on the talking point. I see more questions are coming through on the issue of trust. What we will do is that as we continue the series, there will be little offshoots that we'll have to focus on. And I think the issue of trust is one of those. So maybe next week we'll deal with trust, and then come back to the broader umbrella issue of the 4 principles of financial planning. Sharon, you're in Cape Town. Good morning, Sharon.
Hello, good morning.
Hi.
Morning, Sharon.
Caller.
Morning.
Morning, Brian.
Nice to have you. Nice to have you as a first-time caller. We hope you call.
Thank you.
We hope you call regularly.
Yeah, I do try, but I don't get through, but it's fine. I've been listening to you for many years. I've been listening to SAFM for many years. But anyway, the thing I would like to know, it might just be totally off something. My grandmother stayed in London for half of her life. And she stayed in Harrow, and they bought a house there. So she only had 2 sons, my dad and her other son. Both have died. We are the only grandchildren. My father's brother had no kids. Now, my dad's cousin's son, he says he's the executor of the will. And both my grandmother and my dad's brother, which lived together in the house, they passed on. So he told us that he is the executor of the will, but we haven't heard anything from him. He keeps saying that there's a backlog in London and they cannot proceed. My husband passed away last year, April, 2023, April, and my estate is almost wrapped up. So I don't understand, and that estate in London is like almost going on for 3 years now.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Was your grandmother South African living in the UK, or was she born in the UK?
No, she was living. She's South African that left in the early 50s.
Okay, so she lived in the UK. So so we call it winding up an estate. There they call it probate. And the fact that he's appointed an executor, is he a qualified accountant or is he a trust practitioner? What is his field of expertise?
Nothing.
Okay, well, look, the fact that he's been appointed an executor does not mean that he will be appointed an executor by whatever the office is in the UK. I'm just trying to think. I'll tell you what I'd like to do. We're going to take your number down. I'll talk to our tax practitioner and our estate practitioner in our office as part of our family office, and I'll get back to you. We're just going to take your phone number. We're going to take you back to the studio, and I'll find our details from our office in the UK what you can do.
Thank you so much, Brian. That's
Pleasure.
much appreciated.
Okay, pleasure.
All right,
And
Sharon.
government.
Yeah, surprised that she said that they're a mess in the UK. I mean, if you had asked me if they were in a mess in the UK, I would have said no. I can tell you their pensions operation is absolutely superb. I've had people whose pension hasn't arrived. They've contacted within 3 or 4 days. They've had answers. Really, our offices are a mess, but it wouldn't surprise me. We're always quick to point fingers, and we don't know. It'll be interesting. I'll report back on that next week.
All right. Okay, Sharon, Brian's going to help you out there. Vivian, you're in Paddock. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy, and good morning, Brian.
Morning, Vivian.
Brian, I'm going to ask you a question which you might want to hold over to next week. I'm a pensioner. I do have a will with my bank. However, when I was going through the documentation and I saw the percentage that they as executors would take, I was wondering if it was necessary, because I'm fairly certain that I'm in very, very good health. So I'm expecting to live, please God, for quite a few more years. So I was wondering, if you go into a stationery store, you can pick up these pro forma printed out wills.
Correct, wills, yes.
Yeah. So I was wondering about the pros and cons of doing that. Because, as I say, my estate is going to be fairly straightforward. It's just going to be household stuff which I can make a list of and divvy up, and the kids can decide who wants what. And then the capital, I'm thinking of leaving to the grandchildren rather than the children, because the children are all fairly well off.
Okay. So is that it, Vivian?
That's it. Yes.
Okay. Let me first make the point.
The other reason I thought that if you spoke about it, I'm sure there are lots of other people in a similar position to me who don't have the money to go to an attorney to have a will drawn up, or whatever.
That's why you go to these financial institutions who don't charge you for the will, but they don't charge you on the condition that they're the executor, and they will wind up the estate one day at a statutory cost of 3.5% plus VAT. How old are your grandchildren?
They're all more or less in their 20s already.
So there's no problem for them inheriting. You don't have any problem with one of them being immature and shouldn't be inheriting. Then you can go and draw up a simple will. You can make one of your children the executor. They can go and then appoint and negotiate with someone else to wind up the estate. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Vivian. I'm going to take this question because I think, as you say, a lot of people we're going to deal with trust next week. Remember, please, I'm not an attorney. I'm a trust planner, estate planner, and all the other things. So I'm not going to comment on clause 7.3.2 of a trust clause, but I will deal with yours at the start of next week's program.
Thank you very, very much.
All right.
You may not be an attorney, but you've certainly had a lot of life experience in this kind of thing. So,
unfortunately, 59 years experience, and at least in that period of time, 60 to 70 estates I've been involved with.
I just think there'll be a lot of people who would be happy to know they could walk into the equivalent of a CNA and pick up a piece of paper and get it filled in.
Well, that's why I'm going to deal with some questions. That's why I asked you the biggest question. If your grandchildren are going to inherit, how old are they?
Yeah, my children are all in their 50s and grandchildren in their 20s, so there's no problem.
Okay.
All right, Vivian.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for the question. Brian, that's where we leave it for today. We're out of time. Your number, please.
011 880 4888. I'll repeat that. 001 880 4888. Please, you need to leave the full message, where you're phoning from, and you need to have an answering service. Very frustrating for me to phone back and I can't leave a message.
Brian, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. So we'll do it again next week, Tuesday. For now, it's 11 o'clock. Time for your latest news.
Thanks, Cathy. The top stories: Lamola attends the Jordan conference on Gaza, and more sardines are netted in KZN. A very good morning. Justice Minister Ronald Lamola is leading the South African delegation to a high-level conference in Jordan on the urgent humanitarian response for Gaza. The conference aims to address the dire situation in Gaza, emphasizing sustained aid delivery and the protection of civilians and aid workers. Lamola says that a ceasefire is the only solution to enable the movement of humanitarian aid.
As South Africa, we welcome all efforts aimed to find peace in the Gaza Strip, including the efforts by the U.S., the ICJ ruling. It will take into account both parties. And as the resolution proposed, 3-phase 1, that must culminate into a ceasefire. And also the humanitarian aid to continue continuously unhindered. And we believe that this will work.
A number of NGOs are mobilizing aid for the victims of last week's tornado that left a trail of destruction in Otongati and the surrounding areas north of Durban are now focusing on helping people who suffered damage to their homes but do not have insurance. Authorities say last week hundreds of volunteers helped to prepare over 5,000 meals for storm victims in Otongati daily. The Tongat Disaster Operations Committee spokesperson Yogan Naidu says they are now working to repair the homes of uninsured and unemployed survivors.
We have currently at the moment on the ground engineers who have volunteered their time to do assessments for us to have an understanding as to the magnitude of the repairs, and also to be able to allow the donors an opportunity to understand what needs to be done, what needs to be provided so that these houses can be repaired. We are also very, very thankful for the overwhelming support from our sister organizations, from our friends and families, from all throughout South Africa, from Gauteng, Cape Town, and the entire province of KZN.
Naidu says that people who want to make donations or volunteer their time can visit or contact the Vishvarup Temple in Otongati. Analysts say that members of the MK party still have an opportunity to be sworn in after the first sittings of the National Assembly and the NCOP. The MK has boycotted the first sittings, which are expected to take place on Friday and on Saturday. The party is challenging the election results outcome. It is currently the third largest political party, which garnered 58 seats in the assembly. Professor of Politics at UNISA, Dirk Coetzee, says nothing disqualifies the MK members from taking their seats later.
It doesn't mean that they are completely excluded from Parliament or disqualified from Parliament. What they will not be able to do is that they will not be sworn in as members of Parliament with all the others. They will not be able to participate in the election of the President and of the Speaker and also of the Deputy Speaker. But when they decide that they want to come back to Parliament, join Parliament, they can do so. They have been elected to it. nothing disqualifies them for that. Then a judge will have to swear them in as members of parliament, and once they've done that, then they will become part of the community of parliamentarians in the National Assembly.
A large shoal of sardines has been netted at Umkababa on the KZN South Coast early this morning. This follows yesterday's massive haul at the same beach. The silvery delicacies from the seas are fetching a price of about 300 Rand a crate. Fishing expert Adam Kamda says the netting of sardines is going ahead despite the choppy sea conditions.
Following on yesterday's successful sardine netting, the netters are back at Umkababa this morning. Conditions are difficult with a big swell and strong current, but Abed Khan managed one net of about 80 crates. Other netters are still active in the area. The sardine run is full of excitement, but also has unpredictable risks and dangers. I got news that one of the sardine boats capsized in the surf while attempting to lay their nets. Let's pray for the safety of the skipper and crew. I'll keep you posted as details emerge.
And a court in the U.S. has ordered one of the world's biggest banana producers to pay nearly $40 million in damages to the families of 8 men killed by a Colombian paramilitary group. A jury in Florida said that the now disbanded group killed the men who it believed were linked to left-wing rebels to protect Chiquita International's operations. More from the BBC's Leonardo Rocha.
A jury in Florida said that for many years, Chiquita International paid the AUC, or United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, substantial amounts to protect their operations in the country. The AUC, which has now disbanded, believed the 8 men killed were linked to left-wing rebels that targeted landowners and private companies in Colombia at the time. Lawyers representing the victims say the ruling shows that corporations are accountable for human rights violations committed in countries where they operate.
The top story this hour, Justice Minister Ronald Lamola is leading the South African delegation to a high-level conference in Jordan on the urgent humanitarian response for Gaza. For SAFM News, ke Modupi Makgalemele.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide. Leading the conversation. The Full Circle with Bridget Masinga.
Respiratory syncytial virus. What is that? And am I even pronouncing it correctly?
You've said it correctly, Bridget. So it's respiratory syncytial virus. It is in short RSV. It's one of the respiratory viruses that we see, which is seasonal, and we are seeing it at this time, particularly in the colder months of the year. Mm-hmm. So RSV is but just one of the viruses that can cause infections all the way from your nostrils right down into the chest. It is what would cause things like your flu-like symptoms, essentially.
Dr. Candace Mwandla, who is a pediatrician.
The Full Circle with Bridget Masinga, Monday to Friday, 1 to 3 p.m. The National Pulse on SAFM.
Anybody can make allegations about anybody. And if you step aside or resign merely because of allegations, that can be manipulated simply to get people out of position.
No. Of course, I hear you. That's why, as an employer, you can't just fire all your employees. You need to go through a process. And part of that process is, for example, a disciplinary hearing. Because in terms of disciplinaries, normally, there's some policies and stuff that certain actions may contravene certain policies. So what I'm advocating for is a trial, a criminal trial. The state has to show beyond a reasonable doubt that you are guilty of an offence. But sometimes people's actions may not be a crime, but they have contravened policies.
Advocate Stephanie Fick, Outer Executive Director for Accountability and Public Governance.
The National Pulse, weekdays, 3 to 6 p.m. This year, we are celebrating Youth Month under the theme, Actively Embracing the Socio-Economic Gains of Our Democracy. As we commemorate the massacre of school children during the Soweto Uprising of 1976, we also celebrate the liberation of our beloved country. Hashtag Freedom 30. Hashtag Youth Month. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Welcome to the final hour of the Talking Point this morning. It's 9 after 11 o'clock. Coming up in this hour, we're picking up on a conversation that was held by the Black Management Forum in the last week, Leading Beyond the Ballot, and a discussion really focusing on shaping South Africa's post-election future. Let me welcome onto the show Patrick Gulati, who is the CEO at Good Governance Africa. Patrick, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Apologies for that.
Good morning.
I think there was a slight delay there in that connection. John Foster Pedley is Dean and Director at Henley Business School. John, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to be here. Thank you.
And of course, later on in the show, we'll also be joined by Professor Thuli Madonsela. Patrick, at the time that, this conversation was being held, of course, things were a lot murkier in terms of the direction that South Africa's post-election circumstance or scenario would be. Looking at where we are now, as in today on Tuesday, very much anticipating a sitting of Parliament on Friday. Do you think that the questions that we were asking a week ago around how a government would be formed, do you think that those have been answered, that there's any more clarity now than there was a week ago?
Good morning, Cathy, and to your listeners again. Good morning to the colleagues online. Cathy, to answer your question, things have become much more clearer now with Chief Justice Zondo clearly indicating what's going to be happening in terms of inaugurating and holding a swearing ceremony for the members of Parliament, as well as the election of the president. Things have become much more clearer from the last time we were having this conversation with the Henley Business School and the Black Management Forum. But the issue that remains unclear is what's going to happen to the aspirations of the voters. You see, Cathy, as much as these elections and what is happening is a sign of a maturing democracy, but democracy without development is going to lead to more problems. People have not just elected the members of Parliament so that they could be inaugurated and presidents being appointed. But what needs to happen is they need to use the public resources that are at their disposal to make tangible changes. There's an urgency in the country. The levels of poverty are too deep. The levels of unemployment are so high. And so what parliamentarians and all those that would be installed in the government need to recognize is that there is no time for bickering. It's time now for action and for quick action so that the issues of people can be addressed urgently.
John, your own initial reflections of where we find ourselves currently?
Well, I agree with what's just been said, actually. A lot of it, it's very sensible. We've come to a point where we have a democracy that's spoken and where we're moving into a sort of coalition, which has its pros and cons. But the most important thing is, I think there's a much greater understanding, I think, emerging now that we're all in this together. And none of our children has a thriving future, in essence, unless all of our children have thriving futures. And we can't be running a South Africa with the highest Gini coefficient in the world, which means that the wealth is most skewed than anywhere else in the world. That can't possibly build a competitive and viable economy, let alone bring prosperity and happiness to people. So we have to absolutely focus on changing the level of prosperity for people. And the difficult thing about that, one of the difficult things about it, you can't just give it away necessarily, because prosperity is created through really good work practices, through high standards, through good skills, through working well. And those are things you have to learn. And our rate of learning those things has been really, really slow, unfortunately, because of difficulties in our education system and other problems with politics and the way people have felt about their mission for the country. which unfortunately has felt more about parts of the country or even parties than for the people as a whole. We can only make this country work now by pulling together for everybody's sake. And the interesting thing about that is, in a sense, it's an enormous, exciting and tough adventure. If you are going to do something in your life, why don't you work to make a better society, give people opportunity, and make it better for all of us in a fairer society? And we can do that through good business, good government, and through building up the things that hold democracy in place. Good governance, good courts, good press, good prosecutors, good public protectors. All those things are needed because there are plenty of people who are not on side and would take their own selfish interests. And that battle is going to be forever. But we have a chance now to come together and do something better together than we've ever done before. And trying to put as much of the past behind us as we can without forgetting it for a moment, but using it to draw lessons. We have a chance now to take South Africa somewhere else where all our children and grandchildren can be proud of South Africa and of us.
Prof. Madonsela, let me welcome you into the conversation. Of course, one of the big concerns that has been expressed by South Africans looking into coalition talks that are largely taking place behind closed doors is what is really going to be the foundation of these conversations. What are the principles that are going to be guiding the agreements that parties enter into? And it seems to me that this question is one that has not been answered by the parties yet. Your own view, Prof?
Greetings, Cathy, and I apologize, I went somewhere else by mistake. You are right that the first thing that has to be decided are the principles, and those principles, Cathy, are in the Constitution. The preamble says we are healing the divisions of the past and establishing a society that is founded on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights, where every citizen's life is improved and every person's potential is freed. And the values that should guide us into that society are values of freedom and the achievement of equality with the supremacy of the Constitution. I want to highlight the achievement of equality. I quote the tail end of the last colleague to speak about leaving the past behind us. In Daniels versus Gribante, Justice Edwin Cameron says, "The past is with us. It will not leave us alone until we answer its claims to justice." We were deliberately made into an unequal society. So Section 9.2 is not by accident, where it says equality includes equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. And to achieve equality, special measures may be taken to advance those who are disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. And those who are disadvantaged by unfair discrimination are still disadvantaged today, because we've tried to take shortcuts where BEE affirms some, but apartheid took away from everyone. Patriarch has taken away from every woman. Our disability policies have taken away from virtually all disabled people. And if we don't address that reality of the fact that land was subtracted to some and given to some, jobs were subtracted to some and given to some, commercial rights, properties, etc., were subtracted from some and given to some, and we have that inequality. Mathematically, it's impossible to have a South Africa that functions unless we level the playing field.
Of course, it can be very easy for political parties to pay lip service to the Constitution. It's one thing to say that, we support the Constitution, we uphold the Constitution, and will work towards this constitutional order within our democratic dispensation. It's another to have that practiced and lived out, Prof. So in this context of shaping our future, how do we ensure that the disconnectedness that millions of South Africans have felt from the Constitution, because they say it promises one thing, but their reality is something else, that does not continue under a seventh administration?
I think the starting point would be for the political party leaders, Cathy, to acknowledge that. At the moment, there's disingenuousness where people say, oh, poverty is a creation of the last 30 years, or inequality is a creation of the last 30 years. And they know very well that poverty and inequality operate the way debt operates. If it's not addressed, it increases exponentially. So if you and I right now are treated unequally, and for every 10 Rand I get, you get nothing, or you get 50 cents. If at some stage our benefactor decides at some stage that, okay, it was wrong to underprivilege you, or even to take away what you already have and give to me in addition to adding stuff to me, and then they decide at some stage it was wrong, both you and I deserve to be treated equally. It doesn't make sense to say that equality means I stand on the mountain of economic privilege and social privilege that I have, and you stay on the valley of inequality that has been created and that now will operate equally. The truth is, and we've played this with the rigged monopoly game, what's going to happen is that we'll become even more unequal than we were made to be unequal, because I will use my accumulated social and economic advantages to control the game. So how do we do that? It's just we have to have an honest conversation between the political parties that we need to do something. We don't have to choose between growth. In fact, if we go for growth and then hope for trickle down, we will get exactly what we've gotten, which started from 1999. But we have to go with what the Montfleur scenarios had suggested, which is we take a dual carried road where we don't have to choose between growth and redistribution. We have to do both concurrently and in an intertwined way. And I think it's an honest conversation that we'll have with them. I think most of them have done mathematics, even if some of them may have done, what is the other maths? That basic maths.
Literacy, maths literacy.
Even if they've done maths literacy, we all did. I mean, those who went before me, they called it arithmetic. You just know that you can't assume that somebody who's been subtracted from can operate on an equal basis with somebody who's been added to by subtracting from the other person. It's just illogical to suggest anything like that.
Patrick, a lot of commentators have spoken about the need to center South Africa. South Africans themselves have also emphasized that. What does centering this country mean when all of us have different ideas of what is good for us as a country collectively in this moment? But we also are mindful of the fact that political parties are having these conversations, and there will be the narrow interests of parties that come into play. And every party will be looking at what is going to best serve their organizations, especially in the context of the political landscape and their own futures, right? Because they're already thinking about, well, what about the next election, which is going to be the local elections? What about the next election, which is going to be the national election? So in the midst of all of these personal interests of political parties, how then can we center South Africa and have South Africa and what's best for South Africa be the focus?
Thank you so much, Cathy. I'd like to concur with what Prof. Madonsela said. So the constitutional framework is a context in which we operate. So You mentioned the promise of the Constitution versus the reality of people's lives. What's going to be the center is governance, is good governance. How does the government use the resources that have been made available to them? Resources in terms of financial resources, legislation, policies, all of those things. How are they going to use? That is how they can center, so that we can launch forward this country, which is sort of feeling like we're moving backward because of the problem that we're facing. Another thing that I think is important, I took some time to look back at some of the records, discussions, especially what Nelson Mandela himself recorded as they were looking at the transition to the government of national unity in 1994. What stood out for me was the level of selfless and ethical leadership that drove those negotiations. He tells, his consideration, for example, about representation, making sure that he reaches out to the opponents, talking to them. There was no arrogance, there was humility, with the understanding that for the country to move forward from the apartheid past that was happening at the time, we needed to move together forward on basis of two principles. One was the need for social justice and the need for transformation. If those things are not there, we've got to ask ourselves a question: what has happened? So we all understand that a lot has happened in the country to move up in that direction, but the speed of change was disrupted by the corruption that took place. Now, this political class that's moving into power now have got the responsibility to fast track this transformation, to fast track the democratic dividend delivery, so that people can have confidence in democracy. Omano Edgeji, in a book called Nigeria, Democracy Without Development, he says that a country in which people go hungry is not a democracy, because our democracy has delivered on the right side. In other words, the Bill of Rights, the right to protest. But on this other side of social justice, delivery, development, we need to put more emphasis there. Because what's the point of being able to speak freely and being able to protest when you're coming back home hungry without any employment? So the people that need to center this country have not only got to center it, but they've got to move it forward faster.
John, when we look at how this has been positioned, right, in the conversations we've been having post the election, is that while there's a need for the maintenance of the status quo, whatever one regards that status quo as being, because then that is what brings stability to the country. That is what investors are looking for. And then I take into account what Prof. Madonsela has said, that we need to have an agenda of growth and redistribution. And what we know is that when we look at the redistribution agenda of government over the last 30 years, there's a lot that has been committed to in policy, but in real terms, it has not been supported with the required budget. It has not taken place at the scale and pace at which it needs to make a real and meaningful difference. And it seems that even the word redistribution itself is one that causes panic. People want to run. They hear redistribution. It says, oh no, the country is going down. How do we then bring that recognition of the fact that much of what we're still contending with today is as a result of this unresolved past, and we can't run away from some of these things?
Well, I totally agree. You can't run away, and nor should anyone ever want to run away from the past. What happened through the long history of South Africa has resulted in the majority of people here in the country not having money, not having the housing, not having the education, not having the roads, not having the future for their kids. And as I said earlier, we simply cannot build an economy or a society that has that. So in terms of transformation, it's absolute imperative. And it must become an inevitability, not an imperative. It must also be we drive it, but also as a consequence of what we do in terms of giving opportunities and skills and decent living to people. So I think that, we're faced with a very, very, very challenging issue of how do you reconstruct a society that's been through hope and then despair and now almost disaster and apathy, but now we have to reconstruct it with hope again. And as an educator, I'm incredibly privileged because I see people come from many backgrounds. And when we have graduations, 2/3 of that graduation hall is the families, generations of people who've been doing jobs, struggling to get their children or their grandchildren onto that stage. And it's incredibly moving when you see people coming up, getting their qualifications, and you watch the faces of those families. And for me, that's what inspires me. We have to have almost an emotional as well as a rational focus of why we want to do these things. It's the right thing to do to create a democracy. It's the right thing to do to give people opportunity. And while we think of redistribution is not a zero-sum game. You can redistribute what we have, but an economy is somewhere where you grow things, you grow skills, you grow better services, you grow better things that people need.
All right.
You grow better opportunities, and that's what we do.
I'm going to continue with this conversation in a moment. It's 11:30. Here are your headlines.
Thank you very much, Cathy, and a very good morning. With the news headlines, Cathy Mohlahlana. The MK party has filed papers at the Constitutional Court seeking to interdict Parliament's first sitting on Friday. A number of NGOs mobilizing aid for victims of last week's tornado that left a trail of destruction in Ottongati and the surrounding areas north of Durban are now focusing on helping people who suffered damage to their homes but do not have insurance. And Justice Minister Ronald Lamola is leading the South African delegation to a high-level conference in Jordan on the urgent humanitarian response for Gaza. I'll be back with a full news update at midday.
SAFM has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Under the code, we are committed to giving news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that is not harmful, does not amount to hate speech, or contain violence or explicit sex. If you think we are not living up to that code, then you can inform the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Direct any complaints in writing to the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. PO Box 142365. Craig Hall 2024. Fax to 011-326-3198 or an email to bccsa@nabsa.co.za. For more information, please visit www.bccsa.co.za. This year, we are celebrating Youth Month under the theme Actively Embracing the Socio-Economic Gains of Our Democracy. As we commemorate the massacre of school children during the Soweto Uprising of 1976, we also celebrate the liberation of our beloved country. #Freedom30. #Youth Month. Conversations that you connect with and react to. SAFM. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point. We're looking at shaping South Africa's post-election future and really what are the considerations that have to be on the table as talks about forming a new government are now well underway. On the line, Professor Thuli Madonsela, Director of the Center for Social Justice at the University of Stellenbosch, Patrick Gulati, CEO at Good Governance Africa, and John Foster Pedley, Dean and Director of the Henley Business School. So, John, let me give you a chance to go first because I interrupted you there as you were concluding the point, saying that we need to put intention behind why we are doing what we are doing as a country. What is the end goal? Where are we hoping it will all lead us to?
I think that's true. I mean, looking around, when you see the human beings we have in this country, they are of enormous potential. You know, the thing that I think we often sort of forget that we're all very similar. Actually, our brains are very similar. Who we are around the world, very similar. And, just because, education isn't the same as intelligence, we tend to think people, because they're educated, somehow gifted specially. It's not true. People are out there in this country, millions of them, with enormous potential. And I think we need to push for people's self-belief. If you're going to have a thriving economy, you've got to redistribute opportunities. You've got to give people capabilities, but you have to build it on skills. And what happened to our skills? The sad truth is that 1 in 100 people, according to the minister, actually, 1 in 100 people who start school get a degree within, 5 in 100 get a degree within 6 years of leaving school. Now, if you go to the UK, it's about 50, Finland's about 55. And so you get an enormous number of capable people not given the opportunity that they can build what they can build given a chance. We've got to turn that round radically. And although education is a very emotive subject, you can't build this country without doing very radical things to improve our education and fast. And that's going to give the opportunity, the skills and the dignity of people to really make things happen and give people the voice and the presence that they can make things, they can change things.
All right.
And people who've educated themselves will not be tolerant of corruption because they won't allow people to be given tenders if they can't deliver them. We've got better people, and that's what we need to strive for.
Prof, are there ways in which we can build accountability into our governance, at least in a way that becomes more effective than perhaps what we have done over the last 30 years? Again, what, the outcome of the election, of course, means is that voters have had their say. And now it's up to the political parties. So the millions of South Africans that are going to be affected by the decisions, we're now players on the outside and watching in. We have very little say over the specific decisions that are going to be taken from here on. So how do we build accountability?
Thank you. Cathy, I think Parliament will have to beef up its accountability mechanisms. One of the things I've suggested is a Venice-styled kind of commission that will summarize what the Constitutional Court has decided and bring it to Parliament to say, if the Constitutional Court says everyone deserves social security, what does it mean for us? If the Constitutional Court says you should fast-track land reform, what does it mean for us, etc. So Parliament will have to, civil society, when it comes to social accountability, will have to step up. For example, from the side of the historically advantaged communities, I get a narrative that always says we are unequal because of poor education. But facts point differently. White people are less than 10% of our population. And the majority of people that have been educated, together with white people, exceed the number of white people. So people are excluded from positions, not necessarily because of education. And I attended a Nobel Peace event in Chile many years ago. And I was still, having been educated here in South Africa, propagating improve education. I also, even myself, had not done a mathematical calculation. I was just mouthing what we keep being told. And I was on a panel in Chile in this Nobel Peace event. And somebody said, now, if you educate the poor and you educate the rich, how does that reduce inequality? How does that do that? Because as you educate the poor, you're educating the rich as well. So in fact, the rich get educated better. I live in Stellenbosch. A lot of the rich kids go to a college here that's called Somerset College, which has facilities that are better than a university. So education is good. It was an equalizer at the time when the nobility thought working was beneath them. So if you're poor and you got educated, you could acquire as a lot of wealth through working for the nobility because they thought working was beneath them, and that would equalize. So in a normal society such as ours, education, yes, is important for everyone, but it's not necessarily an equalizer. Yes, certainly, if you are educated, though, in a better situation to make health choices for yourself, better choices about how you deal with your money, but also you're in a position to fly away. So we need to hold each other accountable. In other words, civil society needs to hold each other accountable, because I go to people, a lot of young people that have studied agriculture, my nephew being one of those, they don't have land. Black people own only 4% of agricultural land, 4% of rural land, and urban land. Well, white people own 72%, urban land, white people own 75%. So that has nothing to do with education. It just is those accumulated advantages and disadvantages. And then even if I'm uneducated, if I have land, I can rent out my land and enjoy that. Even if I'm uneducated, I can use generational wealth to employ people to work for me. So I think we should just be honest about there are multiple factors behind why we're still unequal. And then I want to respond a little bit to my colleague, Patrick. I agree with both of you about a whole lot of things you said. But Patrick, I don't think corruption is the reason for slowing down, is the only reason or even the main reason for slowing down transformation. Let's take the Western Cape, which is less corrupt than everything else. Kayamandi is still as underdeveloped as it was in 1994. Iders Valley is a little bit developed, but it's pretty much not the same level as the other places. And then you go to Gugulethu, to Khayelitsha, you go to... So again, that's not due to corruption. It's due to not being agreed about what needs to be done to change people's lives. So people are saying education. No, white poverty was not sorted out with education. Why should black poverty should be sorted out based on a single factor? White poverty was dealt with from a systems point of view. It was picked up for the first time around 1860, but it kept, despite them, taking away land from people through the Glen Grey Act, 1913 Land Act, grew, and then going for job reservation for white people starting from 1911 with the Mines and Works Act, and then in 1926, fully fledged job reservation in all areas of life. White poverty persisted until they put together a group under the Carnegie Commission support to look at the whole system. What were the multiple factors that were making white people poor, primarily Afrikaner white people? They found that education was one of several factors. There were sociological factors. There was infrastructure factor, owning land, so and health, etc. So they addressed this thing from a multiplicity of factors. They gave them land, some of it for free, some of it on 99-year leases, some of it on small bank loans. For example, a friend of mine has a family that owns a house. They owns a farm close to a mountain. When black and white people went to the Second World War, black people were given bicycles. White people were given enough money to buy land. And why was it possible? They were given a generous amount of money, even though they were ordinary soldiers. This guy was an ordinary soldier, the one who owns the farm by the mountain here. Secondly, the land was given to them at minimum cost because it had been taken away from the black people. So I just think we have to be honest about how we're going to fix South Africa. These single factors, this locating the problem in the disadvantaged community, then allows you to keep the system as it is and say, until we fix the defective black people, then we're not going to get anywhere. And I'm not saying some people don't need an upgraded education, but I reject the idea that the reason we're not making headway in middle management and top management in South Africa is because we don't have enough educated black people. How is it that when they get spaces and they run things own, they do better. Portia M, Batu, Tebe Magugu, I can count them. When the space is created for them to do their own thing, they do well.
All right, Prof. Madonsela, thanks for that contribution. Monde, it sounds like there really is a lot more conversation that needs to be had, and perhaps conversation that is frank, that is honest about how we ended up where we are in the first place. Briefly for me.
All right. Good morning, Cathy. Good morning to your listeners. Yes, completely agree that there needs to be a more considered effort to be clearer on the issues. And these issues have been articulated. It's just that they don't take center stage. Right? So the issue of the structural of the economy is paramount. The industry focus. I mean, we've got a pattern in this country where we have 3, 4, 5 major players in every industry, in every sector of the economy, and that's not necessarily an anomaly that just happened on its own. It is a pattern. It is the system, and even when you create space for Black people to thrive, they're not necessarily, chipping away at the massive market share, as an example. So we've really got to unearth this matter and not be afraid of this issue, which is a two-pronged issue. One, we must develop new Black businesses that become big, right? Fall into the category of the 3, 4, 5. So we need to create more of the Black big businesses. That's the first one. Number two, with the existing transformation project, especially at senior management, we are seeing at top management, we're seeing less than 20% of Africans, both African men and African women. And that is why there's been this drive of numerical sector targets and the promulgation of Section 53, the certificate of compliance, etc. We need to really drive both of these areas because so indeed we need to have more conversations, and we are actually looking at a part 2 of this discussion in the next couple of weeks, and to keep up the tension of socioeconomic transformation and socioeconomic rights, which are enshrined as well in our constitution, which is critical for us to keep the conversation going. All right, Cathy.
We are completely out of time. I agree that this conversation certainly needs a part 2. It feels like we've barely scraped the surface of what we needed to get into. That's where we leave it for today. A big thank you to all of our guests. That's where we leave it on The Talking Point. We're back with you again tomorrow.
The book reading. Please note that the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAFM presents another episode of The Door, an addict's journey, read by Simpson Kumalo. I had numerous potential candidates who perhaps had the same desires or lusts as I had. Beautiful girls were everywhere, and I didn't look too bad myself. I even had a few stalkers, but pretended not to be interested. On the contrary, I was burning with desire, but kept it all to myself. I was in an organization with men that were all sexually frustrated, but we hid under the cloak of Christianity. We never expressed our true feelings and our inhibitions, but were burning inside. Had I found a willing participant, I probably would have skipped all the niceties and pleasantries of foreplay and gone straight to the main course. Joining the student Christian movement helped me to find a place to learn to express myself. At last, I could unpack the complex religious beliefs and could get to understand about that guy who died for the world. It was an intimate body of young people learning about their faith in Jesus. We came from various towns and villages, but all of us had one common denominator, which was to find out about ourselves and the roots of our spirituality. It never, however, explained the sexual feelings I was experiencing. On the contrary, this same newfound religion preached against sexual fornication, the very thing I wanted to do. Bigger issues were being grappled with, though, such as how do we marry the struggles experienced by many South Africans with the gospel. It made no sense. We learned about liberation theology and argued that it was a religion that was used as a form of oppression which led ultimately to the dispossession of our land. I facilitated and organized meetings. Everything religious on campus was organized by us.
I became the leader of the movement at school and was responsible for the spiritual temperature of the campus. I became known as the young preacher, but I still didn't know what I was doing. I was not oblivious to the struggles that were taking place across campuses and worked in tandem with some of the groups, albeit underground. Dr. C. N. Patudi College of Education was right next to us, and we would hear of the student defiance campaigns. Although I went through my schooling with relative ease, my school results were not so great. I'd expected to do better and was disappointed, to say the least. I spent the entire December sulking and disappointed with myself. I didn't want to celebrate anything. What of my future? I was annoyed and fearful of the prospect of where to from here. I decided the best thing was to go back to school and repeat the grade because I couldn't get into university with my results. ZCC, which is an independent African church that mixes both Christianity and traditional religion, had its own independent high school that produced amazing grades, even under the ruthless atmosphere of Bantu education. A very authoritarian institution, the high school was run like a military barracks, but I was convinced that I could try my luck there. I was young and still had my life ahead of me. But the boarding experience proved too tedious for me, and I decided to move back home. I was in my late teens, and when I got home, I rejoined my friend and brother David, who was a teacher of maths and science at Pudlon Secondary School. The dream was still alive, and we decided to pursue it. Nothing could stand in our way. Our minds were made up, and everything we did was to investigate how the hell we could leave this God-forsaken country. Not a minute longer did I want to see myself in the hellhole called South Africa. Chapter 2. Opening a new door. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Albert Einstein. I slept and dreamed of America and would speak about it every opportunity I got. Of course, my parents couldn't afford to send me, even though they work long hours every day. It helps to grow up in the streets, and there is some education you receive that you'd never get from the corridors of formal institutions. You learn to be street smart, to cut corners, and to argue your point through. If you're living with sharks, you have to learn how to be bitten by sharks. You learn survival skills. You learn to think outside the box. If you get stopped by police after curfew, you have to think on your feet to get out of the situation. Every Sunday afternoon, it became a ritual for us to visit the airport. We would just walk around and admire the splendor and the magnificence of engineering. I was enamored with the various families who came to bid their loved ones farewell, as though it was the last time they would see them alive. The arrivals and departures of various planes from different countries offered great prospects. We were fascinated, and I guess the dream started to come alive there at the airport. The desire kept growing, and the courage to do something about it became overwhelming. I would dream and fantasize about my departure. It became real, and I could smell it. I could touch it. My sense of purpose and desire to become something consumed me deeply. It is true that if you can see it, you can believe it, and if you believe it, you can do it. I took it all in and imagined having my family there to bid me farewell. I could physically visualize my mom and dad, my siblings, and their respective kids coming to wave me off, bound for the world unknown, far away to start a new life. I couldn't see further than leaving. I had no idea how a life in America would turn out for me. It didn't matter, though. Nothing could be worse than South Africa. What seemed impossible and unattainable started to become possible and attainable. I began to believe. I began to internalize the reality of achieving. Every Sunday without fail, I was at the airport dreaming. Then I would go home to a township engulfed in smoke as families made their evening fires. Little did they comprehend what was being birthed within me. First, I had to overcome my low self-esteem and really motivate myself. I had to conquer my self-doubt. No one in my family had ever been on the plane to go to Durban, let alone the United States of America. It's easy to doubt yourself when you have no history of success from your immediate family. It's easy to look down on yourself when there is no real achiever in the family. There were many excuses running around in my head about why I couldn't do it. The second thing I had to overcome was the negative opinions of other people. I've learned that when you are destined for somewhere and believe in your hearts of hearts that this is what God wants you to do, no one should stand in your way. When Ron and Arthur from the Seventh-day Adventist Church left for the U.S., I figured that if they could do it, then so could I. This wasn't about going into exile. I was purely driven by the desire to want to better my life and that of my family. There were many people who left the country for political reasons, but I was wet behind the ears, politically speaking. I had gotten wind when I was in high school about Steve Bantu Biko and the Black Consciousness movement, but didn't know a lot about it. Growing up in the township toughens you, more so if you come from a family where there's many children. You have to learn to defend yourself, and if you are small, you have to use other means to get out of tough situations and positions. So, to get to America, I used my head. You can't just buy a ticket to the States and hop on a plane the next day. I forged an invitation from the U.S. and got my passport. Then I put a letter together and went to every business person I could find to solicit contributions toward my ticket. I managed to raise some money, but it wasn't enough. I asked my dad if he would talk to his superiors to assist. He agreed to accompany me to talk to his boss, and to my incredible surprise, I was granted an amount sufficient for me to purchase a ticket. The countdown had begun for me to depart South Africa for good, or so I thought at the time. I organized my visa and the tickets and was ready to go, even though I didn't know exactly where I was going. I had mixed feelings about leaving, especially when I realized I might never see my grandmother again. She had practically brought me up and at the time was the closest person to me. Leaving her was heartbreaking, but sacrifices had to be made so I could make a better life for my family. That's the thought that drove me. When the day came to leave, I was the first one up, bags packed and ready to leave. I was scared I'd miss my flight. It seemed like the whole community knew I was going, and I think everyone was happy for me, even the doubting Thomases who had thought my dream was a joke. The whole family were excited and happy and had contributed to buying clothes for me. My achievement was their achievement. There were many tears and prayers from all quarters. I remember the hymns that my mother sang, and I remember the prayers from my mother and my grandmother. These women could summon heaven, and I could sense the presence of God. I was truly blessed. I was prayed up, and I'm sure God above was watching. The doubters' words had finally come to nothing. So many people came to our home to bid me farewell. It was like a little mini church revival. I'm sure my parents were exceptionally proud of their little boy. We didn't have a family car to whisk me off to the airport, so my dad booked and paid for a taxi for the whole family. We literally invaded the airport. From my little nieces and nephews to my parents, I was surrounded by family. It was just my gran who was too old to come. I said goodbye to her at our home, a truly sad moment for both of us. She slipped 20 rand, equivalent to about $3 at the time, into my pocket as I left. I promised my brother that when I got settled, I would make sure I would help him come through. I think had that moment ever happened, my brother would be alive today. The special branch of the South African police harassed my family after I left. They wanted to know my whereabouts and my physical address, and when I made the effort to get my brother to the States, they discovered that I was overseas. They denied him the documents, and his passport was stamped, blocking him from leaving the country for 7 years. This was a blow to our potential reunion. I was gutted. I had never been inside a plane before, and I was about to board a plane bound for America, 20 hours away. In the plane, there were no segregated bathrooms. Growing up in a segregated environment where there were toilets for whites and toilets for blacks, this was my first eye-opener. Segregation was everywhere in South Africa. Restaurants, churches, even in the bus stops, it just stared you in the face. The reinforcement of the idea that white was bad and black was not good was everywhere. And it worked on the mind, making you believe you'd never amount to anything. South Africa was considered to be violating human rights with its racist policies. It was a well-oiled system that was carefully thought out. Strip the black child of his self-worth and you'd have a living corpse, present in their absence. Little did they know that, like the phoenix rising from the ashes, the black child would rise from the conditions and realize how powerful he is in the sight of God. So on the plane, there were no symbols that reminded me of the hatred of the South African situation. We're all equal, at least by sitting arrangements. No one could call me names or abuse me. My first flight was a confirmation that anything was possible, and if you set your mind to something, you can actually achieve it. For me, that flight was the greatest achievement, not only for myself, but for the clan that I represented, the Mariri clan. I was on a journey of self-discovery and self-actualization. I had no idea what lay ahead and what the world was waiting to offer me. It was enough for a while that I was inside the plane and I'd paid my fare and no one could take it away from me. As far as I was concerned, it was a one-way ticket. I didn't know when I would return to the motherland, and if I did return, what I would find.
That was another episode of The Door, an addict's journey, written by Abner Mariri. The book is available on www.abner.africa. It is broadcast on SAFM at 11:45 Monday to Thursday on The Talking Point. It is produced for the station by Vovi Patala, read by Samson Kumalo, technical production by Nanda Koza.
It's just after 12 o'clock on Tuesday, the 11th of June, 2024. Very warm welcome to Updated Noon here on SAFM. Leading the conversation, I'm Sakina Kamwendo. Coming up in the next hour,
Malawian President Lazarus Chakwera then ordered a search and rescue operation. He has rejected reports that the operation was suspended at some point.
Well, monitoring the search and rescue operation for the Malawian plane carrying the Vice President Saulos Klaus Chilima, and the Umkhonto weSizwe Party has filed papers in the Constitutional Court seeking to interdict Parliament's first sitting on Friday. Coming up in sport,
Hugo Broos talks up Zimbabwe ahead of their World Cup qualifier today, and we look ahead to plenty football around the continent.
All those details with John Chirica in the second half of the show. But before then, let us know your views. 41391 is the SMS line number. You'll be charged R1.50 per SMS. Can also write to us via X using the hashtag Updated Noon or our handle at SABC News_radio. Alternatively, send us a WhatsApp voice note. 08269233909 is the number to dial. And let's bring you up to speed with your first news bulletin before we get into any of those stories. Here's Modupi Mohlahlana with the latest.
Thank you very much, SK. The top stories this hour. The MK heads to the Concord over Parliament's first sitting, and NGOs assist flood victims in Durban. A very good afternoon. The MK party has filed papers at the Constitutional Court seeking to interdict Parliament's first sitting on Friday. Chief Justice Raymond Zondo has set the 14th of this month as the first convening of the National Assembly in line with the Constitution. Zoleka Kotashe reports.
The MK party wants the Apex Court to declare Chief Justice Raymond Zondo and or the Secretary of Parliament Xolile Jorda's decision to proceed with convening the first sitting of the National Assembly as inconsistent with the Constitution. The National Assembly is compelled to hold the first sitting of the National Assembly within 14 days of the declaration of the election results at a time and date determined by the Chief Justice, which he has already declared as the 14th of June. Zoleka Kotashe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
The first sitting of the 7th Free State Provincial Legislature will also be on Friday. It remains to be seen who will take the reins as the Premier of the province. 3 Premier candidate names from the ANC have been submitted for consideration. 2 more political parties, the ACT and the MK, will also have representatives at the legislature. Aphumelele Mdlalane has this one.
The ANC has lost 3 seats in the provincial legislature. They received 51.87% of votes in the general elections. That has made room for ACT and MK, which gained 1 seat each. The ANC provincial chairperson Xolisi Dukwana, Deputy Secretary Dibulelo Mangce, and the ANC Women's League Treasurer General Makwin Letsoha Matai have been nominated for the province's premier position. Aphumelele Mdlalane, SABC News, Bloemfontein.
The Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS, says the issue of non-payments for accredited student accommodation is caused by landlords who did not register on the NSFAS Student Accommodation Registration Portal. The landlords are threatening to evict students because of non-payment by NSFAS. NSFAS spokesperson Ishmael Mnisi has pleaded with the landlords to register their accommodation on their portal.
We provided an email asking accommodation providers to register so we can send inspectors to verify that it is true students are residing there so we can make payments. It is one of the things we have done. Secondly, we also asked students who are residing there to be in contact with us and give us the name of student as they are at so we can also send inspectors to verify and make payments.
A number of NGOs mobilizing aid for the victims of last week's tornado that left a trail of destruction in Ottongati and the surrounding areas north of Durban are now focusing on helping people who suffered damage to their homes but do not have insurance. Authorities say that last week, hundreds of volunteers helped to prepare over 5,000 meals for the storm victims in Ottongati daily. The Tongaat Disaster Operations Committee spokesperson Yogan Naidu says they are now working to repair the homes of uninsured and unemployed survivors.
We have currently at the moment on the ground engineers who have volunteered their time to do assessments for us to have an understanding as to the magnitude of the repairs and also to be able to allow the donors an opportunity to understand what needs to be done and what needs to be provided so that these houses can be repaired. We are also very, very thankful for the overwhelming support from our sister organization, from our friends and families, from all throughout South Africa, from Gauteng, Cape Town, and the entire province of KZN.
Naidu says people who want to make donations or volunteer their time can visit or contact the Vishvarup Temple in Ottongati. And Justice Minister Ronald Lamola is leading the South African delegation to a high-level conference in Jordan on the urgent humanitarian response for Gaza. The conference aims to address the dire situation in Gaza, emphasizing sustained aid delivery and protection of civilians and aid workers. Lamola says a ceasefire is the only solution to enable the movement of humanitarian aid. The top story this hour, Justice Minister Ronald Lamola is leading the South African delegation to a high-level conference in Jordan on the urgent humanitarian response for Gaza. For SAFM News, Kemudupi Makhalemele.
Update at noon with Sakina Kamwendo, midday to 1 p.m. Update at noon with Sakina Kamwendo.
Thanks, Madupi. It's 8 minutes after 12. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here on Update at Noon. And once more, the news cycle just keeps on giving. And of course, we now know that Friday will be the first sitting of Parliament. And of course, at that sitting, the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker and the President will be elect. And then the President designate, the President-elect, will then have to be sworn in, inaugurated, I should say, rather, within 5 days. And of course, hoping that he will appoint his cabinet as speedily as possible, because there doesn't seem to be any stipulation. Because you remember, I asked this question to Mercedes Besant yesterday, and I went to look again, and there doesn't seem to be any specification, anything written. So it's silent. The statutes seem to be silent on that matter as to how long the president has for him to actually appoint a cabinet. But I think traditionally it's been done as soon as possible so that you don't allow for a vacuum to exist. So all of these things are taking place. And then, of course, today, a short while ago, we saw the papers that MK Party, the application that they have brought, interdicting or trying to interdict Friday sitting. So Zoleka Kodashe will join us shortly. But I am in studio with our political editor, Mzwaye Mbeche. He's going to talk to us in a short while. So that's the one story. We're also keeping an eye on what's happening in Malawi, that tragedy that's unfolding there. So our correspondent in Malawi, George Mango, has told us that they are in fact waiting for a briefing that was meant to start any time from midday. So we're just monitoring that situation, and as soon as we are able to give an update, we'll do that. Unfortunately, as things stand, if we can get a feed and dip in, we will take you there live as well. But the plane carrying, among others, the Vice President of Malawi,